Hello, I'm Nathan Bond. Welcome to Impact Factor, a seminar series that explores what research universities do, what's expected of their faculty, and what sort of changes we could expect if we became a research university. As you probably know, Texas State University was designated by the state of Texas as an emerging research university in 2012. That means that we will eventually apply to the state for full research university status. If we become a research university, we'll have an easier time attracting even better students and faculty. We borrowed the term impact factor for our series title because that term is used to measure the scholarly influence of academic journals. And research university faculty are generally required to place their publications in high impact factor rated journals. So, what would Texas State be like if it became a research university? How would things change? What would the regents expect of our faculty? This seminar series is designed to answer those questions. And to do this, we'll bring you one seminar each month during the fall semester. I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Tom Grimes, Professor of Journalism and Mass Communication, who will introduce today's seminar. Tom?
Well, thank you, Nathan. Here's the research question for today. Why publish in hard-to-get-into scholarly journals? What's the point? The official reason for publishing in those type of journals is to influence your discipline's theory or methodology. But, do you, do I, does anybody but the most elite among us in the most elite universities really have a chance of influencing the theory or method in our disciplines? May I bottom line the question further? Life at these big state universities like Texas State University is tough enough as it is. You got these large course loads, this substantial service obligation. Why inflict more pressure on ourselves by publishing in elite scholarly venues when we can get the publishing credit we need from our department chairs by publishing in low to mid-level publications, all peer-reviewed, all perfectly legal? Well, here to answer those questions are among three of the best Texas State University scholars working on this campus today. Jessica Pliley is an assistant professor of women's and gender history. Dr. Pliley's book, Policing Sexuality, was published this fall by Harvard University Press, one of the toughest, most rigorous publishers in the academy. She's been a fellow, a research fellow at Yale University, and she is currently under contract with another prestigious imprint, Cambridge University Press. Rayco Graham is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology. Dr. Graham is a cognitive neuroscientist who collaborates with researchers across a variety of disciplines. She is a National Science Foundation grant awardee, as well as a recipient of 3 National Institutes of Health grants. She's the author of 20 academic journal articles, book chapters, and a monograph. Dr. Graham is co-director of Texas State University's Psychophysiology Laboratory. Frank de la Teja is a Regents Professor of History and the Jerome and Catherine Supple Professor of Southwestern Studies. He was the state of Texas' first state historian from 2007 to 2009. Dr. de la Teja was one of the developers of the Bob Bullock Texas State History Museum in Austin, as well as a reviewer for the State of Texas Social Studies Curriculum Standards in 2009 and 2010. He was a panel member in a documentary entitled La Pérdida de Teja, The Loss of Texas, which appeared on Mexican national television. And he's an interview subject in the 6-episode PBS series entitled Latino Americans. Well, thank you for coming out here and showing up and doing this. I want to ask you a question. One of my colleagues at another university compared publishing to pregnancy. All right, now let me explain. He said, just as you are either pregnant or you are not, when you publish something worth publishing, it either moves theory or method or both, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you're wasting your time. The needle needs to move on those two attributes, theory or method. My question to you, what do you think about that statement? Who wants to start? Rachel Graham.
Yes. Well, I think it's a strange statement to make. It's difficult to always know exactly what the impact of your work is going to be, and in many cases, what we consider creative is not something that is determined at the time something's published, but it's something that, is earned over time as people read, as people find out more about it. So to just sort of assume from the outset that because you publish in a lesser journal that no one will read it, it seems a little unfair to
Does
me.
it?
Yeah.
What about you, Frank? What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's an additional element, and that is you've got to be careful that you don't overly restrict yourself. I mean, theory and method are things that for a lot of historians aren't as important as presenting new knowledge, and that new knowledge is not based either on theory or necessarily method. Tried and true methods in history are still practiced by a broad range, and that's the empirical method. But it's presenting new knowledge or telling stories from perspectives that have been missed before. So you're still advancing you're advancing knowledge generally, but you're not overly restricted. And to do that, it's what Reiko is saying is absolutely true. It doesn't have to be in the American Historical Review or the Journal of American History. You can, for instance, in my case, I publish in regional journals. But who am I trying to influence?
Yeah, who?
I'm trying to influence Texans. I'm trying to influence the way Texas history is taught, the place of Texas history in American history. And so I'm interested in reaching educators, and I'm interested in reaching the policymakers who deal with educators. And to do that, a perfectly not only legitimate venue, but a perfectly matched journal or journals are the regional ones, the ones that are read by the people that I'm trying to influence.
Now that is absolutely correct, and that's one of the exceptions to this analogy. If you've got a target audience and you want to drill that audience, then you got to go where that audience is, and you're dead right about that. Jessica, policing sexuality. Why Harvard University Press? You could have gone so many easier places. I've dealt with those people up there, and they are meat grinders. So they're tough.
It actually builds on what Frank was saying. It has to do with the audience I wanted to reach. My book looks at the history of, enforcing anti-sex trafficking policy by the FBI, and although it is a strict historical text, I wanted it to reach people in the anti-sex trafficking movement today. I think that the past has a lot to teach them, and that they're often unaware of it. And to do that, I needed a press that was going to be an academic, a university press, but that would hit a broader audience. And my editor at Harvard has a great reputation. She came out of working in the trade presses, and she has a great reputation of getting academic books in front of more popular audiences or more broader audiences.
Now you're in the humanities division of Harvard. Okay.
Yes, and so because of her reputation for getting books in front of a broader audience was one of the reasons why I was interested in working with them. But she also has a reputation for project development, and this was my first book. And there's not a lot of editors in academic publishing that will spend the time to help shape a project and shape a first book. And I thought that I could benefit from that. I thought that that's the type of editor I want, a line by line, very, very detailed, somebody who's going to give me that type of attention. And within the historical, within U.S. history, I can think of about 5 major editors who do that, and they are kind of a dying breed. And so I was interested in working with my editor, Joyce Seltzer, because she has that reputation.
Well, that's right. And so what you all are saying, am I right, is that you're less worried about the venue and more concerned about the audience.
Absolutely.
And if you have to go where you have to go, that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I had a list of 5 of major publishers that I was interested in. And what I did is I looked at my favorite books that have been published in the last 10 years that have influenced me. And I saw which university presses appeared again and again and again. And that's who I went after. And that was very fruitful, just networking with those people. I've never had a conversation with any editor at any press that hasn't actually taught me something about the process.
Now this is interesting. Here's something a bit off center, but you take the case of Ray Davis at the University of Pennsylvania. And he's dead now. He died a couple of years ago, but he was a physicist who kept doing one failed experiment after another, had a hard time getting published because nothing was turning up. He was looking for a massless, almost impossible to detect particle known as a neutrino that had been hypothesized to exist, but we never quite found one, so he wasn't sure that the thing even existed. And this went on for like 20 years before he caught, I think, 5 of them somewhere in a cave somewhere in a vat of ammonia. And he won the Nobel Prize. He won the Nobel Prize, and he took the hits and the declines of salary increase at the University of Pennsylvania, but he did the work and he won the Nobel. So, I mean, there's another reason to do that, right?
Yeah, and I think, I hope that many of us who are at a place that does require some research, as well as teaching, that part of what drives you and hopefully what makes you a better teacher is that you are doing research and you have an interest in the subject that you're studying, and we're not pursuing dollars. He's a great case because it probably cost him money to do the research he did over the long run. So you're not pursuing dollars, you're pursuing a subject that interests you. And so you're doing your job, but at the same time, you're also maintaining your, for lack of a better term right now, your intellectual integrity. You're searching for the knowledge. You're researching the topic that is of interest to you, and that might not have a payoff for a long period of time. It may never have a payoff, but it's that drive, it's that search, it's that continuity that informs who you are and hopefully is influencing you in the classroom and in your relations with others in positive ways.
Jessica kind of got at this a little bit, and I want to put a little finer point on it. I look at my own experience. I got a PhD at Indiana University, and I learned a lot, and I'm glad I went there. But I have learned so much more about theory and method from these anonymous reviewers in these high impact factor journals who take the time to write 7 and 8 page single spaced critiques of my work. I mean, over 32 years, those men and women taught me not everything I know, but a lot of what I know. Thus, my statement being, to which I want you to react, why high impact factor rated journals? Why hard to get into journals? Because those people will teach you a lot. Am I right or wrong?
No, that's a very good point. I've learned a lot.
Have you learned a lot from
the reviews?
Yeah.
I've learned a lot myself from reviewing as well for those journals, right? So it's not just that I'm submitting things and getting feedback, but I'm also part of the process.
But this NSF grant and these these National Institutes of Health grants, I mean, they're predicated on your prior intellectual work, aren't they? I mean, they're not just
well, you
saying,
have to show
just,
you're capable of
right,
doing
exactly,
what you
and you
propose.
show that. Tell me how you show that.
by having relevant work in the area, being, you need to be able to show them that what you propose to do is something that you actually can do if they gave you the money. So
Well,
you
that's
need to have
exactly
a
right.
background there.
Right.
But publishing is, it's part of the fun part of this academic process, right? It's what we all were attracted to, and we enjoy it. We enjoy being part of this wider research community.
Right.
And I don't think the experience is anywhere close to being as rich as if you were to leave that out of your life.
Yeah. Jessica, in your relationship with this editor at Harvard University Press, I mean, this is what you were getting to, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this woman you're working with is really an important
She's
part
very
of your life
hands-on.
right now.
Yeah, she's a very hands-on editor. She has a great reputation for being a hands-on editor, and I knew that she would help take what had been my dissertation, and no matter how proud one is of their dissertation, 3 years later you look back and you're like, oh, that's, it might have great research, it might have a good foundation, but it was probably not written very well. And so I knew that she would help transform that body of research into a more eloquent piece of writing, and a piece of writing that would be able to reach the types of audiences that I'm interested in reaching. And I'll probably, hopefully, work with her for my second book, and it's been very fruitful. The Cambridge book is a slightly different project because it's a collection of essays, and that came out of, again, this networking, just going to conferences and talking to editors.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back, and I'll ask more questions. Tom Grimes here with Jessica Pliley, the Department of History, Rayco Graham, the Department of Psychology, and the great Frank de la Teja, Department of History. Well, all right. Dispute me then. Just come on, dispute me. See, he's silent. Okay, and appropriately so. You're absolutely correct. Let me ask you this question, and this may be better put to Rayco. And that's the question of incrementalism. One of the criticisms that reviewers of assistant professors and associate professors at the University of Wisconsin-Madison had, where I was before I came here, said that these people were advancing theory and method, but at such tiny little rates that it didn't make any difference. They wanted to see a little more risk, a little more courage. Throw the Hail Mary. What do you think about that? First of all, does that question make sense?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the assistant professors because every time you submit somewhere, it's going to eat at least 6 weeks of review, at least. And so you really want to publish where you think you can get published because you want it to be done in a timely manner. It's very important for tenure. But also, I believe that theory does move forward incrementally. If you really look and see how many things have advanced by these huge leaps and bounds, that's really not how science generally works. It's usually a very slow and incremental process, theory building.
A very fine weave from one thing to another, right?
And oftentimes, the impact of a body of work is not really appreciated until much later.
Well, that's right.
So
that's right. What do you all think about? I mean, you people are Hail Mary people, aren't you? I mean, you do the big grand sweep, do you not?
no.
You don't. Okay. All right. Well,
Well, maybe you more than.
Well, I mean, and not really. I mean, I've been trying to hammer away, and I've used the, for lack of a better term, the bully pulpit to advocate for bringing Hispanics, Latinos, Mexican Americans, Tejanos, whichever phrase you feel comfortable with, into more of the mainstream of the state's and the region's history. But it's been built. It's a building process. I've been building on the work that people going back into the 70s were doing, and the reason it only goes back to the 70s is because before that, there were such limited opportunities for higher education among Mexican Americans. You could count them on the fingers of one hand and still have 2 or 3 fingers left for something else. So that it's only since the 1970s when that first generation of Mexican American students who are able to get into graduate schools and start turning out doing history and doing other social sciences and producing a body of work that could then be integrated into the state and the region's history, that you begin to see that incremental development. And you get to the point where now you've reached a critical mass, and people like me are walking around now being advocates for the Hail Mary part of it, is that we really need to change the way we do the curriculum, because the curriculum isn't serving the students that we have in our classrooms. And the only way to do that is to incorporate all this work that's been done over the last 30 or 40 years that there's still a great deal of resistance to, because it challenges the dominant narrative, which is still in the hands of people who are doing history at the middle part of the century.
Yeah. Now, you've kind of begged asking the question for me, and I want you to, Frank, think about this. I mean, this is a hard question to answer, but look at you. You're a Regents professor, a university distinguished professor. You're the Jerome and Catherine Supple professor. What did you do to get to those positions? What is it about your work that got you there?
Probably that it has gotten the attention of people who were looking at new ways of presenting Texas history, so that I have been able to be influential in the way the story of Texas is told at the State History Museum. I'm working right there. I'm working there on another project now. That I have been asked by people in the educational establishment to look at the curriculum and offer suggestions on how the Hispanic population, and generally minorities and women and all of these other groups who were tended to be left out of the dominant narrative, could be included. So I've worked with the State Board of Education. I've worked with the State Historical Association. My work has been recognized in Mexico, and so I've been able to reach across the border in one of those other areas that I'm very interested in, which is to say that the history of Texas is really not the history, is not part of the history of the United States alone. It's also history of Mexico, and that Texas offers a distinctive way of looking at the history of North America that brings these very different, you use the word weave, these very different threads into a different kind of weave. So that's the work I've promoted, and that's the work that's been recognized.
Well, now, with regard to this Regents University Distinguished and so on, I guess you could have been as smart as you are and as hardworking as you are, and had you decided to examine the history of the newspaper in Chicago, you might not have gotten there, right? I mean, it's the subject matter in part.
In my case, yes, but that doesn't mean that we don't have other Regents professors that are doing something that's tied to.
Well, I was just
Jessica's nodding.
Yeah,
so
I
I'll
was just going to say it's a great time to write a history of newspapers right now, because they're going extinct, and there's a lot of public interest in it. And I mean, you made the point that you were lucky that there were people here in Texas who were eager for what you could contribute, but they're kind of compelled by the same reason that you have interest in the topic as well. And when we're very lucky, they're the questions that drive my research, other people are wondering about, and that can help build a community of both activists, but a community of policymakers, and we can reach beyond, disciplinary boundaries.
Well, it does seem like you two do, and this may not be the correct word, but there's an edginess to what you do. I mean, this isn't the newspaper, the history of the newspaper in 1870 Chicago. There really is a kind of contemporariness to it.
There's a political engagement, which can, I don't think that the relationship of kind of the politics of contemporary anti-sex trafficking activism wasn't necessarily with me in the archive while I'm looking at, at the sources of the FBI. But as I put the project together, I realized that there's a way that the past can speak to the present. And so, you know, in the book, 6 chapters are, you know, very much mired in pre-1941, but the last epilogue, I enter into kind of the contemporary world and the present world. And you know, I think that that's one of the things that makes our work as historians dynamic. We don't want to keep a wall between the past and the present.
Right. Reiko, what do you think about open access journals? Or do you think about them at all?
I have really mixed feelings about them because I think there are very different kinds of open access journals out there. There are some incredibly influential and reputable open access journals. I do not, because I find the cost is prohibitive, even with the discount that they offer. But I know I have a lot of colleagues that I respect and admire who publish in these journals.
So you don't have a prejudice?
There are some that seem to border on vanity, though, right? So you can't say all open access journals are bad or all are good. I think it really becomes a matter, again, of reputation, of being up with the field and knowing which journals are dodgy and knowing which ones are more reputable.
Should we, in your opinion, do like Kansas State University and build an endowment so that faculty don't have to pay, the university will pay? I mean, is the venue worth creating an endowment?
Oh, gosh, that's a really good question. I think that time will tell. But I know in psychology, these open access journals, some of the very best journals are open access.
Really?
And it would,
like what? I mean, name a title.
like Public Library of Science, PLOS, is a very well-respected journal in my field.
Do you people broker in open access?
Actually, in a way I do, but it's not it doesn't charge to publish. I'm helping out some friends with a startup, and it's called the Journal of Texas Archaeology and History. And what they found was that people who were doing field work, in particular, grunt work in the trenches, whether they were archives or literal trenches out somewhere, that they are that the kind of data heavy work that they were doing was having a difficult time finding a place in journals. So the idea of this journal is to publish stuff that you would have a difficult time placing in a traditional history or archaeology journal, and but I'm peer reviewing for them.
Well, does that mean lesser quality? I mean, what does
No,
that? Does that imply lesser quality?
Not necessarily lesser quality, but a more limited range. In other words, the subject matter is more concentrated in the data itself than telling a bigger story. And so it's a matter of being able to get information out. And we have this wonderful resource called the net, but the net is indiscriminate. So just putting it up on a web page doesn't tell people whether this is good data or not. So even if it's just data, even if it's got a very limited purpose to it, if it has a vetting process to it, if it's in a journal that it's been published, researchers have looked at this material and say it's good, it gives it a sense of legitimacy. So open access itself has gradations to it, but as long as there's a review, as long as there's a vetting process for the material that goes there, you're going to, you have it has a certain stamp of approval that's lacking if you just throw up a website because you're interested in butterflies and you want to concentrate on pink ones and brown ones and blue ones.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, although I suspect this doesn't really affect any of you, it's more would affect me and my discipline, communication. And that is, in order to reach the audiences you want to reach, in journals of high measurable impact, frankly, for issues of tenure and promotion, oftentimes scholars, at least in my discipline, go outside of communication, because communication journals are, I don't want to say anything to anger anybody, but there is more rigor in psychology, in history, in sociology, oftentimes, And thus we communication researchers often migrate into your areas and to your area. Do you all do that, or do you feel at home in psychology and history? Do you feel a need to go elsewhere, in other words?
No, I stay in history pretty regularly for my academic publishing. I'll be more, disciplinarily, promiscuous on kind of more on like blog post or kind of online writing that is meant to be more casual.
Counts.
No, and I would never claim it. So for the things that I'm claiming, I'm pretty strictly within the history field.
Is that the way you are, Frank?
Yeah, I'm scratching my head trying to think of having published outside of a history journal.
Well,
and I can't remember ever having gone out.
Well, let's take
discipline.
Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker. Now that man, I mean, he's all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in the Atlantic magazine. He's everywhere. I mean, I guess that's not your cup of tea.
Well, he has an agent. So
Well,
Yeah,
Having a publicist and
yes,
an
he has an
agent.
agent.
Yeah.
His engagement fee is astronomical.
Yeah.
So I don't think he is typical of an academic. I think he is, he's in the stratosphere. So it would be inappropriate to hold myself up to his standards.
would you ever leave I mean, I don't mean leave the department, but I mean, would you ever stray into something else, anthropology or sociology, or?
I think we kind of do that all the time, without really meaning to.
What about you? I mean, what about you? What
Well,
have
I
you done?
incorporate a lot of, I work with people in computing science and people in education, so there's always a bit of
Well, would you
borrowing.
publish in somebody else's journal?
To date, I haven't, but again, if it really is coming down to finding the appropriate audience, I would not say that I would never do it.
Is it the right thing for me to conclude, we got to wrap this thing up now, is the right thing for me to conclude that the big thing we've learned from this is it's the audience, audience, audience. And the implication being that if you have a clearly defined audience, then you can provide an explanation for a tenure and review committee that will convince them that you needed to publish there, that's the logical place to publish, right?
I certainly didn't have a problem justifying where I published and what I published.
Yeah, I think the audience, and I also think you're going to have more success with a clearly defined audience in terms of going after those goals, because not only will it make more sense to a tenure committee, it's going to make more sense to the editors and to the editorial board and to everyone else.
So you really are serious in saying that your Harvard University Press
Yes.
was driven by audience?
Yes. Networking
I'm
as well.
impressed.
Networking helps.
Okay, I'm impressed. No, I
Yeah.
am. I really am.
Well, they're marketing the book as more of a trade publication, so it's not being marketed directly as an academic book, and that changes. You need somebody who knows how to do that, so that it gets in front of that New Yorker audience or the New York Times audience, rather than only the AHR audience. And so,
That's right.
And you're impressed, are you not?
Sure.
Is
I
the-
mean, it's very ambitious. It's also a topic that lends itself to it.
Yeah.
And if she were a less ambitious person, she would have been happy with the first academic press that came along.
Yes.
But she's interested in going that extra step. So bravo for her. And I'm hopeful that as the university increases its pressure on us to publish and to research and to get out there and disseminate, that it's paying attention to audience, so that these tenure review committees understand that it isn't just about how many impact points a journal has or whatnot. It's what's the relationship of those impact points to the audience that you're trying to reach.
Well, Frank de la Teja, Rayco Graham, Jessica Pliley, thank you so much for coming out here. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us.